Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordyn and welcome to my best books that I read in 2022. I am so excited to share this list with you. It has been the best reading year, not only in quantity, I've read over 170 books this year, but also in quality. I truly have some new all-time favorite books that I read this year. I've talked a lot about some of them. I haven't talked nearly enough about others. And so let's just go ahead and get right into the list. I did go ahead and make a list of my top 10 favorite books of the year, as well as 5 honorable mentions. Let's start with the honorable mentions. First, I have a couple of 4-star books that were really close to being 5 stars. And if they would have been 5 stars, they would have been favorites of the year. Let me start by talking about Rabbits by Terry Miles. For the first 75% of reading this book, I thought it was going to be a new favorite book of all time. It has one of my favorite premises that I've ever read. This is about a main character who likes to play this game called Rabbits. Rabbits is a real-life game where you basically look for patterns or inconsistencies in your real life and follow those kind of as clues to win this game called Rabbits. For example, say you look at the clock one time and it's 9:15 a.m. Then you look at your email inbox and it's 915 unread emails. And then say you're walking down the street and you see 9th Street intersecting 15th Avenue. You would take that basically as a clue that you need to follow that street and see where it leads you. Stuff like that, which I just find really interesting. The only thing holding this book back from a 5-star rating was the ending. It got a little bit too out there for my personal taste. It really lost me in the explanation of everything that was happening. However, I would highly recommend this book still to anyone who thinks that sounds like an interesting premise. If you like games in books and puzzles and riddles and want to see that all worked out, definitely recommend Rabbits. I ended up giving it 4 stars, but again, it was so close to a 5-star and new all-time favorite book. My next honorable mention was also a 4-star book, but very close to a 5-star. It's Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian McAllister. This is a mystery type book about this mom who one day sees her son commit a crime. She freaks out, wants to figure out how she can save her son from the situation he's in. And the way the story goes is when she goes to sleep that night, she wakes up and it's the previous day. Then she goes to sleep again and it's the day before that. And so she is basically stuck in this backwards time loop where she just keeps going further back in time with the objective of figuring out how she can change something to get her son out of this situation and cause him to not commit that crime. I really enjoyed almost everything about this book. I was invested in the mystery and I really respect how the story is told. I think it's so impressive not only to build a coherent mystery and be able to write it into a book with plot twists and reveals and everything, but also to be able to do that while telling the story backwards. It absolutely blows my mind. The only reason this was 4 stars instead of 5 is because I did think right in the middle, before things start to get cleared up, it got a little slow and very confusing. And I know the book had to do it in order for the payoff to feel good. It just felt like it was slogging a little bit too much, so I was held back from giving it a full 5 stars. And I do think that will hinder the enjoyment of some readers. But because it was so original and unique and I respect it so much, it still is an honorable mention for my favorite books of the whole year. Next honorable mention is Evidence of the Affair by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is a very short book. It's told in letters back and forth between this couple who are not together. They're actually both married to different people, but they have found out that their spouses are cheating with each other. So it's like the other half of those couples realizing they're being cheated on and coming together just to talk through what's going on and basically helping each other heal and cope with what's happening to them and be able to relate to someone who knows exactly what they're going through. It's a very emotional and touching story. It is a very short book. I can't remember exactly how many pages it is, but that's the only reason for me it's an honorable mention. I still gave it 5 stars, but I wish it was a full novel. Fully invested, wanted more, and would highly recommend if you are a fan of Taylor Jenkins Reid but haven't gotten to this one yet. It is well worth the fast read or listen. Next honorable mention is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. I think this is going to be on a lot of people's favorite books of the year, deservedly so. It's a great memoir, very raw and emotional and eye-opening as to what happened not only in Hollywood but also to this one specific person and her relationship with her mother. I loved it. I think it was the only memoir I read this year, so that's why I'm putting it as an honorable mention, because I just don't have a lot to compare it to in terms of nonfiction or memoirs. Had I read more and this was way better than the rest of them, then I feel like I would confidently put it in my favorites of the year, but maybe it's just a sign to me that I do need to read more memoirs and nonfiction books in general, but I gave it 5 stars. I think it's fully worth the hype, and so it is an honorable mention favorite. And then my last honorable mention book before we get into my actual top 10 is Hidden Pictures by Jason Rekulak. This is a thriller, I would say, though it actually won the horror category in the Goodreads Choice Awards this year. It's about this woman who is a recovering drug addict. She's looking for a job and she stumbles upon this nanny job that is one of those typical too good to be true situations. It's this really nice family with a really nice house and a pool and everything, and she's caring for this 5-year-old child who starts to draw really creepy pictures, and our main character thinks that basically this child is possessed and there's a ghost drawing pictures through the kid, and so she's trying to solve what is happening. This book is polarizing. There are a lot of people who absolutely hated this book because they have found it problematic. I'm not really going to dive much into that discussion in this video. If you want to chat about it, I'd be happy to in the comments or in my DMs on Instagram. I did not find it problematic, and I found this to be an awesome thriller. I loved the creepy vibes from the pictures. I was invested in the story and what was going on. The twist at the end got me, and as a fairly seasoned thriller reader, I don't get a lot of twists that really come out of nowhere to me and surprise me. So whenever that happens, I definitely take note. This did that. And because of that, I gave it 5 stars, and it is my last honorable mention favorite of the year. Okay, moving right along into my actual top 10 favorites of the year. At number 10, we have As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Zulfa Katu. This is a historical fiction book about our main character who lives in Syria. In the middle of war times, she's seeing her community be ripped apart by brutal attacks that are happening. She works in the hospital and is trying to heal people as fast as she can, and she is struggling with the decision of whether she should stay and continue fighting that good fight for her community, or if she should flee to safety for herself and her family. This was super emotional, and it was the type of book that I read 15 pages of it and I knew it was going to be 5 stars. That doesn't happen super often to me. Usually something happens in the middle or at the end to drop off that rating, but this one stuck firm. I read this for a Book of the Month reading vlog, so I will definitely link that down below if you want to hear more thoughts on this book. I thought it was beautiful. I think this cover is beautiful, and I think more people should be reading this book. Number 9 is a book that I just read this month and just squeaked its way onto my list. It is The Other Side of Night by Adam Hamdy. This book I read for an Aardvark reading vlog, and I would never have heard of this book if it wasn't for the Aardvark Book Club service. So definitely check that vlog out if you're not familiar with Aardvark and want to learn more. But this is a mystery thriller book with a sci-fi twist, I would say. And it's the type of book that is so hard to describe because it's meant to be confusing. As a general description, it's about this father who has been separated from his son, and it tells the story of why that happened, why he's in the situation he is, why he has the relationship he does with his son. And I was very confused for the majority of reading this book. It was the type of book where I had to have the physical version in front of me while listening to the audiobook, but it has one of the best plot twists that I've read in a long time. And after getting to the end, after everything was revealed to me, I immediately went back to the beginning and reread the first 3 chapters. And I loved so much how it just all was explained. It all was so clear. And I just love how surprised I was, not only by this book and its actual plot, but also by this book and how I had never heard of it. I had no preconceived notions going in, and it blew me out of the water. And I love that. So number 9, favorite of the year. At number 8, we have the only book that I do not own physically, and I'm sad and surprised by that because it's Felix Ever After by Case and Callender, and it's a beautiful cover. I need it on my shelves. But this is a young adult contemporary novel about Felix, who is transgender, and he is in high school going through normal high school things, but also not normal high school things. Basically, photos of him before his transition and his dead name were posted all over the school, and some people didn't even know he was transgender, so his whole life is turned upside down. It's about him dealing with all of that. This book was just so great, everything you would want from a hard-hitting young adult contemporary book, in that it was hard to read at times, really difficult to see him going through the brutal things he went through, but also hopeful in that he really finds himself. He finds who he can trust and love in his family and friends. So I loved it. I read it early on in the year and it's stuck with me, so definitely deserved a place on my favorite books of the year list. It might be the only young adult book on this whole list, so if you're looking for young adult contemporary, I think this is the best of the best and highly recommend it. Number 7 and number 6 on my list are both romance books, who would have thought? And they're very similar to each other, and it very much solidifies what I love and look for in romance books. Number 7 is Heard It in a Love Song by Tracy Garvis Graves. This is about two adults. I believe they're both divorced. I believe at least one of them has children falling in love. I love books about adults falling in love, especially if they are a little bit older, a little bit more mature. I love when kids are involved, which is a weird thing to say, but I just find it so much more impactful and relatable when characters in a romance have real life stuff they're dealing with. They've got baggage from their past, they've got issues and obligations they're dealing with on a daily basis. I love seeing a couple work through those together and learning to navigate each other's lives that are already kind of fully formed, and they have to figure out where they fit in. This book does include a musical element. The woman was in a band, and the band has since broken up, and she has kind of fallen out of love with music, so she's trying to kind of figure out who she is without that part of her identity, and it's really good. Tracy Garvis Graves with this book has solidified herself as a favorite author in my book, so I will definitely be keeping an eye out for whatever she puts out into the future, because I have loved all of her romances. I find them very emotional and impactful. Similarly, in my number 6 spot, we have Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. This is also an emotional adult romance. This is about a couple who was married. They had multiple children together. They suffered a tragedy together, and really because of that tragedy, they were driven to divorce. When we jump into this story, they are 2 years into their divorce. They're both kind of starting to move on, but they're still really in each other's lives because they, again, have children together, and they also own a business together. And this was super emotional to read because not only did they suffer through loss together, but also the idea of seeing someone that you were married to and still really care about, watching them move on with someone else is kind of unimaginable to me. So super hard to read, very impactful to me. And again, I just loved seeing them work through their complicated adult issues. I love the inclusion of therapy in this book and how that was all depicted and how each member of the family kind of went through their own individual journey. This was another one that I just read this month, and I'm really glad I did because I absolutely loved it. I'm so happy it's on my favorites of the year list. Okay, now getting into my top 5. This really is the best of the best. At number 5, I have The Nightingale by Chris and Hannah. I finally took the dive into reading Chris and Hannah this year. I think I read 4 or 5 of her books, and this is definitely my favorite. The first one I read by her. This is about 2 sisters living in wartime France. They have differing opinions about the war and about what they should be doing to be fighting in the war or standing up for their beliefs. They get separated for a time, pursuing those different beliefs, and it's all about their stories. It's beautiful. I don't know if there's much I can say about this book that hasn't already been said, but if you like historical fiction, I really do think Chris and Hannah is one of the best authors for it, and this is a book I would highly recommend reading if you haven't gotten to it yet. Number 4 is my favorite thriller of the year, and it's Reckless Girls by Rachel Hawkins. I read this book, I think, way back in January, and it's reigned as my favorite thriller ever since. And it's funny because I don't necessarily think that this book does anything revolutionary or that I've never seen done before in a thriller, but I had so much fun reading this book. This was the type of thriller that I started one night in bed. I expected to read maybe 40 or 50 pages before falling asleep and ended up reading 200. And that almost never happens to me, but is one of the absolute best feelings I feel like you can have while reading a book, is just that addictiveness where you can't put it down. You have to keep flipping the pages. You know you're gonna regret it in the morning, but you just can't stop reading. That's what happened to me with this book. It's about 2 girls who are vacationing together in Hawaii. They hire this couple to bring them to this deserted island on their boat. So the 4 of them go to that island together. They end up stranded there. Crazy things happen from there. The ending of this book was wild. I loved every second of it. I just felt like this was a true thriller in that it kept the pace up. I was truly thrilled to be reading this book, and that feeling to me means something. So my favorite thriller of the year and my top 4 favorite book overall. My number 3 favorite book this year is a sci-fi. It's called The Darkness Outside Us by Elliot Schrafer. I did a whole dedicated reading vlog to reading sci-fi books set in space or about space, and I think I read this book as part of that video. This is about 2 guys who wake up on this spacecraft in space. They don't remember getting on the spacecraft. They're a little confused about how they got there and what their mission is. They're the only people on the spacecraft, and so they have to work together to figure out what are they doing there, how are they gonna survive, and it goes from there. This book is so good. It was great from a sci-fi perspective. I loved like the spaceship living elements of it and having to fix things on the ship that are breaking and like work towards their mission. There were twists in here and things that change your whole perspective about their situation and throw you for a complete loop. And there's a romance, which definitely could have thrown this book off and made me not like it, because I definitely am the type of person who, if there's a romance subplot in either a thriller or a sci-fi, I would prefer it not being there. But this one, I'm so glad it was included. I loved reading about this couple's relationship and how like the survival element in their situation strengthened their bond. I loved it. Please read it if you like sci-fi at all. So good. Number 3 favorite book. Okay, we are really getting down to it. Time to talk about my top 2 favorite books of the year. In the number 2 spot, we have The Violin Conspiracy by Brendan Slocum. This is a mystery book, I would say, about this main character who is a Black classical musician. He plays the violin. He's really gone through a lot to get to where he is as a highly renowned violinist. He's about to enter this really important international music competition when the night before it's supposed to start, his violin gets stolen. Not only is that bad for him in the competition aspect, but also this violin was super valuable, like $10 million worth valuable. And this book is just about all of that. It's about why this violin is so valuable, again, about this violinist's upbringing and how he got to where he is today and the extra struggles he's had along the way being Black, and then about the solving of the mystery of the missing violin. So good, so different from other mysteries that I've read. I love the musical elements in here. If it sounds even remotely interesting to you, please pick it up. I think it's worth the read for so many reasons. This is this author's debut novel, which is shocking, and his new one is coming out this coming spring. So you know I have that pre-ordered and will be reading that second book as soon as I can physically get my hands on it. This book is so good. One of my all-time favorite books for sure across all years, but my number 2 favorite book of this year. Which means we are down to number 1. And honestly, if you have been watching my videos since this summer, you already know what this book is. I've talked about it a lot. I've featured it on Instagram. It's not gonna be a surprise, but for anyone who doesn't know what it's gonna be, it's The Measure by Nikki Erlich. This is such a cool book. It has a dystopian premise where it's about one day, everyone on Earth wakes up to a box outside their front door, and inside that box is a string that represents how long that person's life is going to be. And I mean literally every single adult in the whole entire world at the exact same time gets this box. And everyone goes into this frenzy of like, what does this mean? Is this real? People who didn't open their box right away have to determine, are they going to open their box? Do they want to know how much longer they have to live? And this book is the aftermath of all of that. And I just loved it. As I was reading this book, I kept having thoughts pop up of like, how would this affect this situation? Like parenting, for example. How would parents talk about this with their kids? Then immediately after I had that thought, this book would talk about that. Or like, how would this affect politics? That's in this book. How would this affect healthcare and trying to triage patients when you know their life expectancy? This book covers that. It covers everything I could have wanted it to and more. I thought it did it so well. Not only is that plot extremely interesting, but also the characters in this book are incredible. You follow a lot of different characters with a lot of different situations. Long string, short string, haven't looked, different professions, and you come to care about all of them. I feel like I could talk about this book for years and years, but in general, if you like dystopian, sci-fi, or contemporary books, I think you're gonna love this one, and I'm so happy I read it this year. Truly is one of my favorite, if not potentially my favorite book of all time at this point. I love the cover of it and the aesthetics. This is also a debut, and I can't wait to see what this author puts out in the future. I just love this book. So there you have it, my number 1 book of the year, my top basically 15 books of this year. Please let me know your thoughts. Have you read any of these books? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Have I convinced you to put any of them on your TBR? Let me know. Also let me know what your favorite books of this year were. I would love to compare and discuss. But other than that, I don't think I have anything else. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.